Charles, you're in a different place than you started. You've come a long way. Start at the beginning
Mm.
and share your story with us.
Yep, I'm grateful for the
Mhm.
place I am in. But no, I mean, like many or most men, it started actually when I was 8 years old or nine, and there was this group that gathered in the middle of a playground, and all the curious boys, went, "What's going on there? Somebody fighting?" No, there were two boys in the middle watching very hardcore porn, but photos. And it went away until my teenage years. But what I saw, it was just shocking, actually, because it was very explicit. And obviously, during my recovery years, I discovered, yeah, when that happens to a young boy of that age, even to a teenager, if he doesn't expect it, in a sense, that's a form of abuse on them as well, even if it's unintentional. But so that laid the seeds, for my teenage years to be drawn towards anything that's sensual or pornographic. And my story was growing up very isolated, feeling abandoned. Because, of course, my mum left my dad when I was 3 months old because he was an alcoholic, beating her. And actually, it's a good thing that she left. I mean, having a husband that beats you was not the right thing. So, in that sense, she made the best decision there. Then I stayed with my grandparents. And it's only later that I discovered why my grandmother always felt like my mother to me rather than my mum. And of course, when she married my stepdad, apparently at some point, I think it was probably 2, 3 years old, he said that my mum and I are too close. And so she distanced herself physically. And that was really what I remembered, sort of feeling rejected by my mum, not wanting to have anything to do with her, not wanting hugs or cuddles from her. So that's how I grew up, deprived of physical touch, so to speak. And so it was quite easy for me to fall in the trap of pornography when I went to boarding school as a teenager. Had to stay my first weekend in and not go and visit my uncle and my aunt, with whom I had a good relationship with my cousins, and discovered the medicating power of pornography and masturbation. And even though I became a Christian 2 years later, I think the spell was perhaps broken for 3 to 6 months, and then I was, the loneliness and the feelings of rejection and abandonment came, and it was very easy to surrender to pornography and masturbation. A bit more controlled, but still the bane of my existence, in a sense. Had a good break from it when I had a very deep spiritual experience as a student in my second year, and I thought I was free. And I was sober for 7 months. But, accidentally walked past, went to the bathroom one evening, walked past the calendar laying open, and yeah, fell and acted out again. And the rest is history. Slowly built up a pattern again. Then hoped that the marriage would solve it, of course, like many other men, which it didn't. And although my wife knew about my masturbation, and I never sort of made the connection to tell her about the porn. And of course, that came back quickly within 3 to 6 months. And that caused, excuse me for the sneeze, of course, problems in the marriage, because later I discovered I was still attached to this habit. I was still attached to the drug of pornography, and obviously to the habit of masturbation, which is self-centered and taking care of yourself, so to speak. So never had really struggling to learn what it means to give myself fully from a platform of both spiritual, mental, and emotional intimacy, which should then grow and open up the couple and eventually culminate into the physical and sexual intimacy. So our physical intimate life was basically a battlefield. It was I always think of World War One and the trenches, and when you look and you just see barbed wire and just shell holes. And I think, that's how my wife and I looked at our marriage. And it was very difficult, and pastors couldn't help. The few we went to, we started with a psychologist that seemed promising, but then we moved. And long story short, uh, pornography escalated in '93 because until then South Africa was very, very strict on pornography, so it was very limited. But in '93, things opened up and it became far more graphic. And when I saw myself escalating, it really scared me. And that's when I, for the first time, learnt the power of accountability. Saw a good friend of mine who was an associate pastor. And for 7 months, I was sober again because good support, strong support, good accountability. But then we moved to the United Kingdom, couldn't find a accountability partner. And after 2 years or 3 years of struggling, discovered SAA, and then things started to progress very slowly. So, yeah, mine was unfortunately a struggling and a troublesome journey. And although I gained sobriety and grew in my recovery, somehow things didn't work between my wife and I. And the reason is obvious now, because we never heard of betrayal trauma. So we were stuck with SAA's group, which they had for couples, which worked on the co-addiction model of all things and codependent model. And my wife just said, that's not her. And I said, well, I do agree with you, but where do we go from here then? Where are we going to get help? And fortunately, not long after that, Barbara Steffens came out with her book, and gradually we began to learn what things were all about in terms of the woman that is hurting and struggling with her trauma symptoms. But it took me a while to really grasp and understand, the position of the wife. I think probably like most men, I was, I'm going to use the word obtuse, or a bit slow to learn. Because I was in the defense forces in South Africa, it was just very difficult for me to make that leap and say, oh, right, is it really true that every time that a husband, if a man acts out, it's like a woman basically going through a landmine experience? It was difficult to link the physical experience with the emotional experience. But once you get to know how emotions work, you do understand that that's indeed the case. And then I realized the importance of absolute commitment to both sobriety, continued recovery, but also, I would say three things started to emerge. The importance of being very consistent in trust building. And that's where Jason Martinkus's book on Worthy of a Trust helped a lot. And then, of course, developing compassion and then learning empathy. So I learned a lot from a book that was written by Steve Arterburn and somebody else about living compassionately with somebody who suffers from PTSD. And although it's not a direct sort of link to betrayal trauma, it's very, very similar because the symptoms are essentially the same, and it teaches you steps and techniques as to what to apply and how to grow in developing compassion for the person. What I think Marsha's book of learning empathy really brings in, which is invaluable, is the whole fact that you are the perpetrator. You, the man, the husband, is actually. So it's not only somebody who's suffering from trauma, but also how do I, as the perpetrator, what can I do? What is the extra mile that I can and walk? And it's been a slow process. It is still a process, although once you're in the process, it is good to know what the principles are. And I have learned that it's the law of the farm that very much applies. The law of the farm is nothing is instantaneous. It takes a season for things to occur, but in the meantime, as a farmer, you need to be faithful planting the seeds and weeding the lands, making sure there's rain coming down. And so do the things faithfully that a farmer would do during the year, but know that there is a harvest season coming, and you don't always see the fruit immediately. And there are setbacks. There will be hail, there will be rain, there will be strong winds and hurricanes, ruining the crops, perhaps even. And so, yes, I made mistakes along the way. Learning patience and compassion and empathy is never a linear thing, and it's not easy. From time to time, I still must remind myself I need to be patient. I need to be listening. I shouldn't defend myself now. So it's a long journey, but it's a very important one, and I'm grateful for having learned these things and grateful for the people, as Marsha and Barbara Steffens particularly, I would say, as pioneers. And the other man that really, really helped me a lot in the field of recovery, it's just the way he went about communicating things and really making me realize if I want this to succeed, I need to do whatever it takes. And that was Dr. Magnus Milton. So I think he was probably the one that meant the most to me in my recovery breakthrough. And Marsha and Barbara Steffens and the work they did was the most valuable in teaching me. And I'm not there yet, is to how can I be an empathetic and a compassionate and a trust-building husband, and remain faithful with that, and know that it is a process. And I think that's where Pat Carnes helped me, because when Karen and I couldn't start growing together, even though I've reached sobriety and was successful in my recovery, because we haven't learned of betrayal trauma yet. Once we did, when Pat Carnes said the process is generally 2 to 5 years, I sort of heaved a sigh of relief, because before that it seemed like this is going to be a 25-year process. Now, in a sense, it is going to be a lifelong process, because I would continue to grow. Karen would always continue to heal and grow herself. But at least you find traction in a way that you would never find before, having learned the lessons of sexual betrayal trauma and what it entails. So I'm just grateful to be on this journey and to learn these things. And many other small things were very invaluable for me along the way. I mean, the one thing that really helped me a lot was learning about the brain's neurochemicals. People are just different, I think. And for me, that somehow I think that's where Karen and I are very different. She would say, "But I've told you these principles many times before." But I said, "But you never talked about the neurochemicals," and showed me how. And of course, that's not how her brain works, but mine works that way. To know that the dopamine flooding damaged my neuroreceptors, developed wrong neural pathways, and by consistently learning how to not react but respond responsibly through help of various techniques and accountability and being in a group, as well as developing healthy routines, I realized that's one of the ways in which the brain is rewired, and in which you release other chemicals which balances up in your brain and helps it to rewire properly. And Paul talks about, being continually transformed by the renewal of our mind. So I knew suddenly on a neurochemical level how my brain is being renewed, actually. And that just helped me to be more faithful in saying, right, recovery is many times a matter of knowing what is the right thing to do and doing it faithfully, and keep on practicing that. And the effects will eventually be greater and greater in my life. But apart from that, there's also inner work, yes, inner child work that needs to be done. I had to learn how to grieve, to be able to cry about what I sensed as my losses. It's part of the process. So there's a very strong emotional element to this as well. And I think, as time went on, I could see with greater depth how recovery is not only recovery, it's sort of the start of a lifelong transformation process and growth process, which needs to continue, because if you don't continue, everything that doesn't progress will regress. and you could, of course, end up where you were, which is a desperate place. And that's my story.